They called me the Siren Psycho and tried to get me committed until July 4th, 2025, when my useless $60,000 warning system saved 2,200 lives from a flash flood that should have killed hundreds. Picture this, 3:47 a.m., my 130 decibel siren screaming across Comfort, Texas like Judgment Day. Half the town stumbles out cursing my name. The other half, already running for higher ground. 6 hours later, the Guadalupe River swallowed cars whole and turned homes into floating debris. But here's the thing. Nobody died. Well, almost nobody. Because that eyesore in my backyard gave families enough warning to escape with minutes to spare. The HOA president who sued me, her house took 4 feet of water. Mine stayed bone dry on the hill, sirens still wailing over the wreckage. What would you do if neighbors tried silencing something that could save lives? Tell me where you're watching from. Bet your area has a similar story. I'm Marcus Whitfield, 52, with enough gray hair to prove I've seen disasters most people only watch on TV. Spent 15 years coordinating FEMA response, pulling bodies from floodwater, explaining to families why warnings came too late. Lost my wife Sarah to Hurricane Laura in 2020. Not the storm itself, but the stress. 3 evacuations in 2 years because nobody could organize proper warning systems. Her heart gave out in a Red Cross shelter surrounded by the smell of industrial disinfectant and other people's desperation. Standing on my deck that first morning in Comfort, Texas, I made myself a promise while looking at Sarah's photo. Never again caught unprepared. Chose this house specifically, high ground overlooking the Guadalupe River Valley. From here, I can see the whole town spread below like a model train set, pretty and fragile. The siren installation was 3 days of diesel fumes and limestone dust. Federal Signal Model 508, same unit NOAA uses for tornado warnings. $47,000 for the siren, $13,000 for the 40-foot pole. This beast pushes 130 decibels, loud enough to wake sleeping families when disaster strikes. Sarah always said I was paranoid. Looking at her picture each morning, I whispered, maybe, but paranoid people don't bury spouses because bureaucrats failed at their jobs. Enter Bethany Krueger, HOA president and my personal nemesis. 45, white Escalade with blessed plates, moved from Dallas seeking rural charm, meaning Instagram-worthy country living without actual inconvenience. Her husband Preston develops real estate in San Antonio, which should have been my first red flag. Day after installation, she marched across my property like Sherman through Georgia. That thing violates our aesthetic covenants. Show me where emergency equipment is prohibited, I replied, calibrating weather sensors. It's traumatizing children. I handed her my architectural review waiver. Emergency systems are exempt under Texas law. Her HOA papers felt flimsy compared to my legal documents. We'll see about that, she snapped, leaving behind expensive perfume that smelled artificial in the Texas heat. My morning coffee suddenly tasted bitter, like disappointment mixed with caffeine. But the community reaction revealed deeper complexities. The first test siren bounced off limestone hills like thunder. Neighbors emerged like prairie dogs checking for danger. Newer residents, Bethany's crowd, scowled and covered ears. But old-timers who remembered the last big flood nodded approvingly. Frank Morrison, my Vietnam vet neighbor, wandered over that evening. Cicadas were starting their twilight chorus, and you could smell rain building, that Texas scent of ozone and possibility. Hell of a noisemaker, he grinned. My wife's nervous, though. Bethany's been asking questions, making people choose sides. Some folks are scared of getting involved. Mrs. Patterson from down the street stopped by a few days later, wringing her hands. Marcus, I signed Bethany's petition, she admitted quietly. But my late husband was Navy. He always said being prepared wasn't paranoia, it was responsibility. I'm having second thoughts. What changed your mind, Mrs. Patterson? I asked Bethany what happens if we actually need emergency warnings. She said 911 would handle it. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. My husband knew better. When disaster strikes, you're on your own for the first crucial minutes. Tommy from the hardware store pulled me aside during my next visit. Marcus, I support what you're doing, but Bethany's making business difficult. She's organizing people to shop elsewhere if I help you. Tommy, I understand. Small business comes first. It's not right, though. My grandfather died in the 1952 flood. He would have loved that siren. These conversations revealed the community's real divide, not between noise-tolerant and noise-sensitive residents, but between people who'd experienced emergencies and those who hadn't. Mrs. Chen, whose family ran the local restaurant, shared her perspective. In Taiwan, we had typhoon warnings that saved thousands. American safety systems are good, but individual preparation is better. Why do people fight against being safer? The Guadalupe River had been flooding this valley for millennia, but suburban transplants saw only scenic water views and property values. They'd forgotten, or never learned, that beautiful rivers become killers during storms. I was about to remind them of that inconvenient truth. Bethany's first assault was surgical in its precision. Within 72 hours, she'd weaponized suburban bureaucracy. Formal noise complaint with Kendall County, petitions signed by 23 neighbors, and a Facebook group called Comfort Residents Against Noise Pollution. The Facebook group was pure suburban warfare art. Stock photos of peaceful meadows, testimonials about my industrial death machine ruining morning yoga, and my favorite, a post claiming the Siren traumatized local wildlife. Because apparently, deer and armadillos have anxiety disorders now. But Bethany's real genius was character assassination. Whispers followed me everywhere. Clearly suffering from PTSD, shouldn't be trusted with dangerous equipment, probably dangerous to the community. My counterattack was methodical but revealed community complexity. While Bethany spread gossip, I researched her background like a federal investigator. Public records revealed the truth. Highland Park, Dallas, the kind of neighborhood where they sue over fence heights and lawn ornaments. 3 HOA lawsuits in 5 years, always as plaintiff, always claiming others ruined her peaceful enjoyment. Pattern recognition, she moved before each case reached trial. I contacted Jake Morales, County Emergency Coordinator and former Marine who understood preparedness versus paranoia. "Marcus, this is the most sophisticated civilian warning system I've seen," Jake said, examining my control panel. "Better than half our county equipment." His written endorsement carried official weight, government letterhead backing my installation. Knowledge nugget. Federal signal sirens must penetrate building walls and wake sleeping people during emergencies. That's why they sound loud. Modern homes with double-pane windows and central air require 130-plus decibel levels to overcome sound barriers. Key takeaway. Emergency sirens must be loud enough to save lives when people are asleep indoors. Bethany escalated to sheriff complaints. Deputy Rodriguez arrived looking like he'd rather chase actual criminals than investigate noise disputes. "Ma'am says you're disturbing peace," he told me, but his tone suggested he knew this was ridiculous. "Monthly test, first Monday, 10:11 a.m. as required by manufacturer," I replied, showing documentation. Rodriguez ran his decibel meter, found readings within legal limits. When Bethany demanded my psychiatric evaluation, even he looked annoyed. But the community split was revealing deeper fractures than I'd anticipated. Tommy at the hardware store pulled me aside one morning. "Marcus, I support what you're doing, but Bethany's making business difficult. She's organizing people to shop elsewhere if I help you." "Tommy, I understand. Small business comes first." "It's not right, though. My grandfather died in the 1952 flood. He would have loved that siren." However, Johnson from Creekview Manor had different concerns. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm not against safety, but my retirement savings are tied up in this house. If property values drop because of, well, industrial equipment, I could lose everything. Can't you understand our position?" His honesty cut deeper than Bethany's manipulation. These weren't all entitled suburbanites. Some were genuinely scared about their financial security. Mrs. Chen, whose family ran the local restaurant, shared her immigrant perspective. "In Taiwan, we learned to watch for flood signs because government warnings came too late. Here, people trust systems that sometimes fail. Your siren gives people choice. Listen or ignore, but they have warning." Frank Morrison organized informal coffee meetings where older residents shared flood stories. 1978's 3 deaths, 1998's property devastation, near misses that didn't make headlines. "People forget," said Bill Crawford, retired from Austin Fire Department. "They think modern technology means disasters can't happen here. But weather doesn't care about GPS or cell phones." These conversations were building grassroots support, but also hardening opposition lines as neighbors realized they had to choose sides. Bethany's response was to escalate economic pressure. She approached local businesses systematically, creating an economic squeeze. The feed store couldn't order my weather monitoring equipment. Tommy's Hardware stopped carrying specialty batteries. Even Maria at the coffee shop started giving me looks like I'd committed war crimes. "Sorry, Marcus," Tommy said, not meeting my eyes. "But she's got influence." So I drove 20 miles for supplies, which was inconvenient but educational. Other communities dealt with similar HOA power trips, and word was spreading about the prepared guy in comfort who'd stood up to neighborhood tyranny. The sabotage started small, but escalated quickly. Someone cut my Siren's backup battery connection at 2:17 a.m. Security cameras caught a white SUV, license obscured, but the timing and precision suggested inside knowledge of my system. Paint cans found in Bethany's garbage the next day. Circumstantial evidence, but the pattern was clear. I upgraded security immediately. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, redundant power systems. My property started resembling a government facility, but that's what happens when neighbors declare war on emergency preparedness. The isolation was becoming painful. Grocery clerks counted my change twice. My barber asked pointed questions about stress management. Even the mail carrier avoided eye contact. But looking at Sarah's photo each evening, I reminded myself, this isn't about being popular, it's about being prepared. Bethany hired a Dallas attorney who charged enough per hour to fund a small nation's defense budget. Her lawsuit was legal theater at its finest, diminished property values, intentional infliction of emotional distress, plus my favorite, creating a climate of fear in a peaceful community. $50,000 in damages, immediate siren removal. The papers felt expensive, that crisp stock that screams billable hours. But that evening, I overheard a telling conversation between Bethany and Preston through my open window. "If this project fails, we'll lose everything, my reputation here, our investment, everything I've built in this community," Bethany's voice carried across the yard, desperate and afraid. Her motivation became clearer. This wasn't just about noise or aesthetics. Her social standing and financial security were tied to Preston's development succeeding. But Bethany's city lawyer made one critical error. He didn't understand Texas emergency law. My counterpunch was surgical precision, but the community dynamics were more complex than simple opposition. While Bethany played legal warfare, I was gathering geological evidence that would make any reasonable person reconsider building in flood zones. Dr. Elena Vasquez from UT had studied hill country weather patterns for 20 years. "Marcus, Guadalupe River Basin is statistically overdue for major flooding," she explained over coffee that tasted like burnt ambition. "Climate data shows your neighborhood sits in a historic floodplain developed without adequate warnings." The geological survey I commissioned read like horror fiction. 17 deaths in 1952 when both waterways surged. Exact same area where developers later built Riverside Estates and Creekview Manor. Knowledge nugget. Texas law protects emergency preparedness equipment serving public safety on private property. Henderson v. the City of Austin, 2019, established that municipalities cannot prohibit civilian early warning systems supplementing official networks. Key takeaway. Property owners have legal rights to install emergency equipment protecting their community, regardless of aesthetic complaints. But the community pressure was revealing unexpected allies and deeper fears. Bethany formed her Community Standards Committee, 5 suburbanites with too much time and not enough real problems. She systematically pressured businesses to blacklist me. Linda Martinez, a single mother in Bethany's coalition, approached me hesitantly one evening. "Mr. Whitfield, I signed Bethany's petition because the siren scares my daughter at night. But my neighbor mentioned something about flood insurance. I don't understand all this, but I'm worried I made a mistake." I spent an hour explaining flood risks and evacuation procedures. By the end, Linda was taking notes. "Could my daughter and I attend one of your emergency preparedness workshops?" she asked quietly. "I think we need to learn about this." However, this backfire was revealing. Mrs. Patterson approached me after being pressured to join Bethany's committee. "Marcus, she asked me to spy on you, report any suspicious activity." When I refused, she suggested I might not understand community standards because I'm widowed and isolated. Mrs. Patterson's voice shook with anger. "That woman is cruel." Johnson from Creekview Manor had a change of heart after doing research. "Mr. Whitfield, I looked up flood insurance rates after our conversation. My agent explained that properties in historical flood zones need adequate warning systems, or premiums triple. Bethany never mentioned this when she organized our petition." Dr. James Wright, retired meteorologist, contacted me directly. "Mr. Whitfield, I reviewed your system specifications. This exceeds National Weather Service standards for civilian installations. Mind if I examine it personally?" His endorsement letter to the county was devastating to Bethany's case. This represents gold standard emergency preparedness that should be replicated, not removed. The sabotage escalated to professional levels. 2:17 a.m. Tuesday, security cameras caught multiple figures cutting not just backup power, but also attempting to damage weather sensors. This wasn't random vandalism, it was coordinated assault on emergency infrastructure. Sheriff's investigation found sophisticated tools in Preston's construction company truck. His crew had both access and expertise for this type of sabotage. Knowledge nugget. Emergency systems require redundant power sources because disasters cause grid failures. Modern warning networks use main power, backup generator, battery bank, and solar array, 4 independent sources ensuring operation during infrastructure collapse. Key takeaway. Critical safety equipment needs multiple backup systems because emergencies always cause power failures when you need equipment most. The harassment campaign was affecting my family connections but also building unexpected support. My sister called from Houston. "Marcus, someone contacted my workplace asking about your mental health history. They claimed to be conducting a community safety assessment." This crossed lines from neighborhood dispute into personal attack territory. But it also backfired. Frank Morrison's American Legion post rallied support. "Marcus, these guys understand the difference between being prepared and being paranoid. Want to speak at our next meeting?" The veteran community was mobilizing. Men who'd seen real combat knew authentic preparedness from mental instability. Mrs. Henderson, Bethany's former ally, had an awakening moment. "Marcus, my insurance agent asked about flood coverage. When I mentioned living near the river, he pulled historical damage reports. Houses just like mine were destroyed in 1998. Bethany never mentioned any of this when she organized our petition." But Mrs. Henderson's change of heart wasn't immediate. She struggled with leaving Bethany's group. "I'm scared of being ostracized," she confided. "This town is small. If I cross Bethany, where does that leave me socially?" I understood her fear. Small communities run on social networks, and opposing the HOA president meant risking isolation. The legal pressure was building beautifully. David Rodriguez discovered Preston's company had environmental compliance problems beyond just my neighborhood. 3 other developments showed similar patterns. Minimize flood risk in public documents. Build in questionable areas. Lobby against safety requirements. Marcus, this isn't isolated harassment. It's systematic suppression of safety information to protect development profits. Weather monitoring was showing ominous patterns. June 2025 brought record precipitation across the Gulf Coast. Something catastrophic was building in the atmospheric data. Looking at Sarah's photo that evening, I whispered, "We're getting close to something big, aren't we?" Bethany's desperation reached levels that would embarrass reality TV contestants. With her lawsuit stalling, she pivoted to full character assassination, hiring a private investigator who specialized in reputation management, corporate speak for digging up dirt on inconvenient people. When that produced nothing spicier than overdue library fines, she went nuclear on my personal life, spreading poison about Sarah's death throughout the community grocery store loud enough for produce sections to hear. Preston's company developed sudden interest in my employment history, making calls to former FEMA colleagues with questions about my psychological fitness and workplace incidents. My strategic response was connecting dots others had missed, but I was also grappling with self-doubt. While Bethany torched my reputation, I was playing detective with public records. Preston's company had quietly filed preliminary plans for Guadalupe River Estates, 200 homes positioned like sitting ducks in the exact flood zone my geological survey had marked. The timeline was damning. HOA harassment began 3 weeks after Preston filed with county planning. This wasn't about noise. It was about silencing proof that their development was a death trap. But late one evening, looking at Sarah's photo, doubt crept in. "Am I doing this for the community, or am I just trying to fix what I couldn't fix for you?" I whispered to her picture. The question had been eating at me for weeks. USGS flood records painted a terrifying picture. 1952 killed 17, 1978 claimed 3, 1998 took 1 life. Major floods every 20 to 25 years. We were mathematically overdue. Knowledge nugget: flash floods kill more Texans annually than all other weather disasters combined. Most victims die because they receive inadequate warning. Urban flash floods give people an average of 6 minutes to reach safety once water starts rising. Key takeaway: early warning systems extend evacuation time from minutes to hours, literally the difference between life and death. But the community dynamics were more complex than simple pro-anti-siren camps. Maria Santos, the restaurant owner, shared her immigrant perspective during a chance encounter. In El Salvador, we learned to watch for flood signs because government warnings came too late. Here, people trust systems that sometimes fail. Your siren gives people choice: listen or ignore, but they have warning. Bill Crawford, retired firefighter, offered tactical support. Marcus, I'm organizing emergency response volunteers. If your siren activates, we'll have people positioned to help with evacuations. Can't do much about politics, but we can save lives. These conversations revealed something Bethany hadn't anticipated. Her opposition was creating genuine community emergency preparedness networks. But Mrs. Henderson's struggle showed the social complexity. Marcus, I want to support you, but leaving Bethany's group feels like social suicide. This is a small town. My bridge club, my church committee, they're all watching to see what I do. Her fear was real and heartbreaking. Supporting emergency preparedness shouldn't require social martyrdom. The harassment escalated to systematic social isolation. False police reports claimed I was testing that siren constantly, despite security footage proving monthly scheduled tests only. Anonymous complaints flooded county offices about the dangerous veteran with military equipment. Mrs. Patterson confided her fears. Marcus, Bethany approached my daughter, suggested I might be losing mental capacity because I support your siren. She's trying to turn family members against each other. The manipulation was becoming personal and cruel, targeting elderly residents' relationships with their own children. Bethany's community meeting was perfectly orchestrated character assassination. First Baptist Church, sanctuary smelling like old wood polish and social warfare. Bethany had stacked the crowd with supporters, limited my speaking time to 2 minutes, brought local media for maximum humiliation. This man's disaster obsession is traumatizing our children, she proclaimed from the pulpit like delivering gospel. His paranoid delusions are destroying our community's peace and property values. When my moment came, I stood slowly, letting silence stretch. I've pulled bodies from floodwater, I said, voice carrying without amplification. Families who died because someone decided warning systems were too expensive or inconvenient. You can call me paranoid, but corpses don't get to call anyone anything. Uncomfortable shifting, a few guilty nods. Most people suddenly found their shoes fascinating. But then something unexpected happened. Tommy from the hardware store stood up. I've known Marcus 6 months, known Bethany 3 years. One of them has disaster response experience and one has HOA experience. When my business is underwater, I know who I want making emergency decisions. Dr. Wright, the retired meteorologist, also rose. I've examined Mr. Whitfield's installation professionally. This represents best practice emergency preparedness. Opposing it is like opposing smoke detectors or seat belts. The tide was shifting, and Bethany felt it. Her response was venomous. These people are clearly influenced by his military propaganda and fear tactics. But the room's energy had changed. People were thinking instead of just reacting. After the meeting, Frank Morrison found me in the parking lot. That was either brilliant or career suicide, he said, gravel crunching under our boots. In emergency management, there's rarely a difference, I replied. The weather data was becoming apocalyptic. July heat had turned Texas into a convection oven, but Gulf storm systems were building with mathematical precision toward disaster. Every atmospheric measurement pointed toward meteorological catastrophe. Standing on my deck that night, looking at Sarah's photo, I finally knew the answer to my earlier question. I'm doing this for both of us, aren't I? The smoking gun arrived through an unexpected source. Not legal discovery, but a conscience-stricken engineer named Miguel Santos, who worked for Preston's environmental consulting firm. Miguel approached investigative journalist Sarah Chen after seeing her preliminary articles about development patterns in flood zones. His hand shook as he handed over a flash drive containing internal communications and suppressed environmental studies. I have a family, Miguel explained in a coffee shop parking lot, voice barely above a whisper. These people buried a flood study that could save lives. I can't sleep knowing what I helped hide. The evidence was devastating. Preston's company had commissioned legitimate flood risk assessment for Guadalupe River estates. The hydrologist's report read like Stephen King: extreme flood vulnerability, inadequate natural drainage, and any development would require comprehensive early warning systems for resident survival. But that death sentence of a report was buried deeper than nuclear waste. Preston's team submitted sanitized studies to county planning that made their flood zone sound like Eden with better drainage. The conspiracy was documented in digital communications Miguel had saved. Internal email chains between Bethany and Preston's business partner, Harold Vance, revealed the scope of their scheme. Bethany, 3 weeks before her first siren complaint. Need to neutralize the siren situation before flood questions escalate. County commissioners are asking about emergency preparedness requirements for new developments. Harold's response was corporate psychopathy. Environmental mitigation costs $2.8 million minimum. Easier to discredit the messenger than spend money on proper flood infrastructure. Preston's reply sealed their fate. Bethany's handling the HOA pressure campaign. If county recognizes legitimate flood risk, our construction financing disappears overnight. But the revelation hit me personally too. These people weren't just silencing my siren, they were suppressing life-saving information to protect profit margins. They'd rather families drown than spend money on flood mitigation. Standing in my kitchen that evening, looking at Sarah's photo, the weight of it crashed over me. They're willing to let people die the same way I lost you, I whispered. For money. The legal ramifications were staggering. Environmental fraud, conspiracy to suppress public safety information, potential bank fraud for misrepresenting loan collateral. Preston's company faced federal charges that would make organized crime prosecutors smile. David Rodriguez explained the scope. Marcus, this isn't suburban harassment anymore. This is systematic suppression of public safety data to facilitate fraudulent development. Miguel's evidence could trigger federal RICO investigations. But the revelation about community manipulation was personally devastating. Bethany's campaign wasn't grassroots opposition. It was purchased AstroTurf designed to silence emergency preparedness before Preston's environmental fraud became public knowledge. Mrs. Patterson's story suddenly made terrible sense. Marcus, when Bethany first approached me about your siren, she said county officials were concerned about liability issues. She made it sound like you were creating legal problems for the community. The manipulation had been systematic. Bethany used people's trust and community spirit to serve Preston's financial interests. Miguel's courage was remarkable, but his fear was real. Mr. Whitfield, if Preston discovers I leaked this, I'll lose my job and face retaliation. But I keep thinking about my kids playing in those areas during floods. Some things matter more than paychecks. I contacted Sarah Chen immediately. Sarah, I'm giving you exclusive access to internal communications proving development companies are suppressing flood safety data to protect profits. Her excitement crackled through the phone. Marcus, this is Pulitzer-level investigative material. Environmental fraud, political corruption, public safety suppression. This story has everything. The strategic pivot was immediate. Instead of defending my right to own emergency equipment, I began investigating Preston's company like a federal prosecutor building a RICO case. Every buried environmental study, every suspicious political donation, every community manipulation, all documented evidence of systematic fraud. Weather patterns were intensifying toward disaster with mathematical precision. June storms had saturated soil beyond absorption capacity. July heat was building atmospheric pressure toward explosive release. Miguel had given us the smoking gun, but Mother Nature was about to provide the trial by fire. Building a war machine against environmental fraud required assembling the right team. I recruited specialists like a military commander preparing for complex operations, each bringing unique capabilities to expose Preston's conspiracy while the weather patterns built toward catastrophe. Sarah Chen became my investigative weapon, 28, tenacious journalist with Pulitzer nomination for exposing municipal corruption. She'd been tracking development fraud across Hill Country for 2 years, waiting for the perfect case. Marcus, Miguel's evidence is the smoking gun I've been hunting, she said over coffee that smelled like journalistic ambition. Preston's company has a pattern: build in dangerous areas, minimize safety requirements, then vanish when disasters strike. Jake Morales provided official credibility. County emergency coordinator couldn't publicly attack Preston's development, but could enthusiastically endorse civilian warning systems and provide technical expertise. Dr. Elena Vasquez brought scientific artillery. Her University of Texas credentials carried more weight than loaded freight trains, and her flood modeling would turn Preston's environmental reports into statistical confetti. Frank Morrison rallied grassroots support. Vietnam vets understand fighting for principle versus territory. He organized Veterans for Emergency Preparedness with support local warning systems buttons spreading through older residents like patriotic wildfire. But we also had Miguel Santos, our insider with a conscience. Miguel provided continuing intelligence about Preston's company activities while maintaining his cover. His engineering expertise helped us understand the technical aspects of the suppressed flood studies. They're rushing to get county approval before storm season, Miguel warned during a clandestine meeting. If flooding happens before their fraud is exposed, they'll claim nobody could have predicted it. Countersue for harassment, conspiracy, and interference with emergency services. Use Miguel's evidence to force federal investigation into environmental fraud. Subpoena all suppressed studies Preston's company had buried. Whistleblower evidence transforms civil disputes into federal criminal cases by proving systematic fraud rather than individual disputes. Sarah would dissect Preston's company history like forensic pathology, focus on their pattern of building in questionable locations, while lobbying against inconvenient safety requirements. I upgraded my Siren into comprehensive early warning network, added real-time flood monitoring connected to USGS river gauges, integrated with National Weather Service systems, created automated community alerts across multiple platforms. Knowledge nugget. Modern civilian emergency systems legally supplement official warnings when using certified equipment and established protocols. NOAA encourages private early warning systems coordinating with federal monitoring networks. Key takeaway: citizens can enhance community safety by installing professional-grade warning systems that work with, not against, official emergency services. Frank's Veteran Network launched free emergency preparedness workshops. We taught flood evacuation routes, emergency supply management, family communication plans. Bethany's harassment was creating the most disaster-ready community in Central Texas. But we also had to manage community healing. Mrs. Henderson was struggling with her decision to leave Bethany's coalition. Marcus, some of my Bridge Club friends are giving me the cold shoulder. Supporting you feels like choosing sides in a war I never wanted to fight. I spent an evening helping her understand the insurance implications and flood risks, but also acknowledging her social concerns. Mrs. Henderson, you're not choosing between neighbors. You're choosing between profit and safety. Your friends will understand eventually. Bill Crawford organized volunteer emergency responders. Marcus, we're setting up rapid response teams. If your siren activates, we'll have people positioned for evacuations. Can't fix politics, but we can save lives. Financial investigation track revealed stunning corruption. David's investigation discovered Preston's company dancing on thin ice with a $4.2 million construction loan requiring environmental clearance before groundbreaking. If county recognized legitimate flood risk, that loan would be called faster than repo men chasing overdue payments. But the corruption was more focused than I'd initially thought. Preston had targeted specific county officials with modest bribes rather than running a massive influence operation. The strategy sessions felt like FEMA command centers, except instead of coordinating disaster response, we were preventing disaster through legal warfare. David's office smelled like leather briefcases, strong coffee, and slowly brewing justice. Weather monitoring painted increasingly ominous pictures. June 2025 brought unusual Gulf Coast precipitation, and atmospheric models suggested potentially catastrophic storm season approaching. My upgraded systems tracked everything: upstream river gauges, precipitation rates, soil saturation, meteorological forecasts. We're seeing conditions similar to 1998, Dr. Vasquez explained during technical briefings, pointing at charts resembling heart attack patient EKGs. Extended wet period followed by intense rainfall events. Textbook setup for devastating flash floods. Meanwhile, Bethany thrashed like a drowning swimmer. She hired nuisance law specialists and filed federal complaints claiming my siren violated FCC radio regulations, like claiming garden hoses violated NASA space shuttle protocols. But community support was solidifying in unexpected ways. Tommy's wife approached me privately. Marcus, my husband couldn't say this publicly, but we support what you're doing. Bethany threatened our business, but we've lived here 40 years. We remember when rivers flood. All pieces were positioned like chess pieces before checkmate. Legal documents filed, media investigation launched, community support mobilized, technical systems optimized. The only uncontrollable variable was weather, and Mother Nature was preparing to demonstrate why emergency preparedness isn't paranoia. It's survival insurance with guaranteed payouts. Bethany's final gambit combined every desperate tactic she could muster. She hired Austin environmental consultants who could find endangered species in suburban strip malls, claiming my siren disrupted critical migratory bird habitat and caused acoustic pollution affecting native wildlife reproduction cycles. Simultaneously, she filed federal FCC complaints claiming my emergency equipment violated radio frequency regulations. despite sirens operating on acoustic principles that have nothing to do with radio waves. Her 40-page environmental report was ecological science fiction that blamed my siren for personally offending every armadillo in Central Texas. The endangered species complaint landed on county desks like regulatory napalm. Preston's PAC distributed $25,000 in campaign donations within 5 days to 3 county commissioners, while Bethany threatened recall elections against anyone supporting my environmental terrorism. My nuclear counterattack was beautifully engineered. While Bethany bought politicians and invented wildlife crises, I unleashed the ultimate weapon against suburban hypocrisy: flood insurance actuaries with accurate historical data. The insurance revelation was devastating. 8 quiet coalition families received flood insurance cancellation notices or premium increases exceeding 300%. Insurance companies had cross-referenced property addresses with USGS flood history databases. Mrs. Henderson faced $4,800 annual premium increases unless adequate community flood warning systems were installed. Marcus, Bethany never mentioned insurance implications when she organized our petition, Mrs. Henderson confessed during a parking lot conversation that reeked of betrayal and financial panic. My mortgage company is demanding flood coverage or they'll call the loan. But her transformation wasn't immediate. I feel like I'm betraying my friends by changing sides, she admitted tearfully. This town is small. If I cross Bethany, where does that leave me? I spent time helping her understand it wasn't about betrayal. It was about survival. Within 10 days, Bethany's coalition collapsed faster than cheap campaign promises. The conspiracy investigation revealed criminal-level corruption, but more focused than massive influence peddling. David Rodriguez's financial archaeology uncovered systematic but targeted corruption. Preston's company had bought specific county officials through modest bribes disguised as consulting fees and charitable donations, rather than running a massive influence operation. Commissioner Bradley Hutchins received $8,000 in direct consulting payments, plus $15,000 in environmental grants to his wife's nonprofit, all within 2 weeks of voting against emergency preparedness funding. Marcus, this transcends HOA harassment, David explained, spreading financial documents that smelled like corruption and impending justice. But it's focused corruption. They targeted key officials rather than buying everyone. My technical preparation achieved military-grade sophistication. I installed ham radio networks for when cellular infrastructure failed, created waterproof paper contact lists because digital devices become useless when submerged, coordinated with volunteer fire departments who understood emergency response realities. Knowledge nugget: emergency communication systems require analog backups because digital infrastructure fails catastrophically during disasters. Cell towers lose power, internet dies. Smartphone batteries expire when people need help most. Ham radio operates independently of commercial infrastructure. Key takeaway: critical emergency systems need low-tech backup options because high-tech solutions become expensive paperweights when power grids collapse. But community dynamics revealed surprising complexity. Tommy's wife Sandra approached me privately. Marcus, my husband couldn't say this publicly because Bethany threatened our business, but we remember the 1998 flood. Water came up so fast people barely escaped their cars. Your siren would have saved lives then. Dr. Wright organized growing scientific support. Mr. Whitfield, I've contacted colleagues at NOAA, National Weather Service, and University Meteorology departments. We're preparing joint professional endorsement of civilian early warning systems. Political pressure can't override scientific facts. Maria Santos shared immigrant perspective that cut through suburban politics. In El Salvador, we learned to prepare for disasters because government help comes too late. Americans trust systems that sometimes fail. Your siren gives people choice, listen or ignore, but they have warning. Choice is freedom. The harassment reached absurd but revealing levels. Anonymous flyers distributed throughout the community claimed I was stockpiling military weapons and planning vigilante justice against HOA authority. Sheriff's investigation found my arsenal consisted of 1 hunting rifle, camping equipment, and emergency supplies sufficient for extended weekend trips. But there was one technical concern that kept me awake at night. During a routine system check, I discovered a minor glitch in the automated activation sequence, a software bug that could delay siren activation by crucial minutes during rapid onset flooding. I spent 3 sleepless nights debugging code, knowing that every second of delay could mean lives lost. Standing on my deck at 2 a.m., tools scattered around the control panel, I whispered to Sarah's photo, "What if this doesn't work when it matters most?" The doubt was eating at me, but Frank Morrison found me there and provided perspective. "Marcus, perfectionism is the enemy of preparedness. Your system is better than anything this county has ever seen." Weather data was painting atmospheric horror stories. July heat had transformed Central Texas into convection furnaces, but Gulf storm systems were building with mathematical precision toward disaster. Soil saturation levels exceeding historical records, river flow rates trending toward flood stage, atmospheric pressure patterns developing into what meteorologists call perfect storm scenarios. "Marcus, these conditions haven't occurred since 1952, Dr. Vasquez warned during our pre-storm briefing. Her computer models resembled medical scans of terminal weather cancer. "We're looking at potential for catastrophic flooding that could exceed anything in Texas recorded history." Miguel Santos provided final intelligence. They're rushing county approval meeting to July 3rd. Preston knows the weather patterns. If flooding happens before approval, their project dies. They're gambling on beating the storm. Bethany scheduled her final community confrontation for July 3rd, demanding county commissioners order immediate siren removal with full media coverage and audience carefully stacked with remaining supporters. She'd chosen the worst possible timing for weather-related battles. Mother Nature was preparing to deliver the most expensive education in emergency preparedness that suburban Texas had ever received. The air tasted like metallic electricity and approaching catastrophe. Every atmospheric indicator screamed impending disaster. July 4th was 36 hours away, and meteorological conditions were aligning for biblical-scale flooding. But I had one final conversation with Mrs. Henderson that gave me hope. "Marcus, I stood up at Bridge Club yesterday and told them why I changed my mind about your siren. 3 other women said they'd been having doubts too. Sometimes it just takes one person to give others permission to think differently." Bethany was about to learn why you never silence the person trying to save your life, especially when that person has 15 years of disaster experience and Mother Nature as an ally. July 3rd community meeting packed Comfort Community Center tighter than campaign promises in election season. 150 residents squeezed into folding chairs that groaned under 6 months of accumulated neighborhood warfare. Bethany had choreographed this final performance like Broadway director staging her career-defining revenge fantasy. Her supporting cast was impressive. Dallas attorney in $3,000 suit, bought and paid for County Commissioner Hutchins, 3 news crews hunting content, and enough supporters to disguise public execution as democratic process. I walked in alone, carrying weather monitoring tablet and quiet confidence earned through 15 years of pulling families from preventable disasters. The community center reeked of burnt coffee, nervous perspiration, and toxic small-town politics gone septic. But I noticed something Bethany had missed. Several former opponents sitting quietly in back rows, including Mrs. Henderson. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bethany announced from her makeshift pulpit, "tonight we end this 6-month nightmare once and for all." Her PowerPoint was masterclass manipulation, restoring peace to our community. Featured petition signatures, fabricated noise complaints, property value studies, and testimony from allegedly traumatized children who couldn't sleep because of my military-grade psychological warfare equipment. "This siren provides 0 legitimate safety benefit and maximum disruption to our quality of life," she declared, gesturing at installation photos like presenting evidence of neighborhood terrorism. "We demand immediate removal and financial compensation for months of harassment." Commissioner Hutchins nodded with enthusiasm that $23,000 in purchased loyalty could buy. His corruption practically glowed neon under fluorescent lighting. News cameras captured supportive crowd murmurs, raised hands voting for siren removal, apparent community consensus that Marcus Whitfield required immediate neutralization. Then my tablet buzzed with automated federal alert that transformed everything. The mic drop moment arrived with Mother Nature's authority. I stood slowly, tablet glowing like digital oracle of approaching doom. Room fell silent except for fluorescent humming and distant thunder most people hadn't noticed. "Ms. Krueger," I said, voice carrying 15 years of disaster coordination authority, "your timing is absolutely remarkable and catastrophically dangerous." I projected tablet screen onto wall behind her podium. "Flash flood warning. Guadalupe River and Cypress Creek. Immediate evacuation recommended for low-lying areas." This alert was issued 26 minutes ago, I announced, watching faces transform from anger to confusion to dawning terror. Guadalupe River is currently cresting at 15 feet. Flood stage is 12 feet. Your million-dollar dream homes are about to become expensive aquariums. Commissioner Hutchins jumped up, face red with indignation. Enough, Whitfield. This is completely out of order. His protest was cut short by my Siren's automated systems responding to federal warnings with mechanical precision. The 130-decibel wail pierced the community center like a call to survival. But then something beautiful happened that Bethany hadn't anticipated. Mrs. Henderson stood up in the middle of Bethany's crowd. Wait, my insurance company warned me about flood risks last week. They said properties in our area needed warning systems or coverage would be canceled. Marcus was trying to protect us? Dr. Wright rose from the back. I'm a retired meteorologist. Mr. Whitfield's installation meets or exceeds federal emergency standards. Opposing this is like opposing smoke detectors. Tommy stood up with visible emotion. Marcus, I owe you an apology. I let business pressure override doing what's right. Thank you for not giving up on us. Bethany's response was pure entitled suburbanite in crisis. Shut that thing off. This is illegal intimidation and psychological terrorism. I looked out at the crowd, remembering Sarah's face, feeling her presence in this moment of vindication. This is for you, Sarah, I thought as the siren wailed overhead. I can't shut it off, I replied as my Siren's automated systems responded to federal warnings with mechanical precision. It's busy saving your worthless lives. The 130-decibel wail exploded through community center like a avenging angel with megaphone. Half the crowd covered ears in pain, but smart half was already grabbing car keys and dialing family members. Ladies and gentlemen, I continued over beautiful sound of life-saving noise, you have approximately 43 minutes to reach higher ground before floodwater turns your neighborhood into expensive lake. I suggest you stop debating and start driving. The flood hit with Old Testament precision. 3:47 a.m. July 4th. Guadalupe River and Cypress Creek converged in a muddy torrent that swallowed roads, cars, and developer dreams. My automated warning network triggered like perfectly coordinated survival symphony. Siren wails, social media alerts, emergency service notifications, ham radio broadcasts to volunteer responders. 2,200 residents evacuated in pre-dawn darkness, guided by emergency protocols we'd established while Bethany fought to silence the system saving them. The rescue operations were textbook emergency management, but not without cost. Coast Guard helicopters arrived at sunrise, plucking 23 people from rooftops like mechanical guardian angels. Emergency responders coordinated through my ham radio network when cellular towers failed exactly as predicted. 3 people sustained serious injuries, broken bones from rushing evacuations, a heart attack from stress, but no deaths. The Gonzalez family lost their house completely when they delayed too long, but escaped with their lives. Without that civilian warning system, we'd be conducting mass casualty recovery instead of rescue operations, Coast Guard Commander Sarah Walsh told cameras while my Siren continued its life-saving concert. The reckoning was swift and merciless. Bethany's house took 4 feet of flood damage, everything below ceiling destroyed. Her white Escalade floated 3 blocks downstream like expensive driftwood. Insurance denied claims because she lived in documented flood zone while fighting flood warnings. Preston's environmental fraud surfaced during flood coverage. FBI investigators arrived Tuesday with warrants and pointed questions about suppressed safety studies. They'd been reviewing Miguel's evidence for weeks, but the flood brought national attention and immediate action. The woman who'd spent 6 months trying to silence emergency preparedness was rescued from her own roof by crews guided by the siren she'd fought to destroy. Almost 0 deaths, successful evacuation with minimal casualties. One very expensive education about why you don't silence people trying to save your life. My Siren stood on its hill like mechanical guardian angel, still wailing warning over community that finally understood why some noise is worth making. The aftermath unfolded like justice served with cosmic irony and federal law enforcement garnish. My story became national news, textbook case of why communities should listen to prepared individuals instead of HOA politics. FEMA Director Patricia Williams flew in personally, bringing enough federal credibility to make politicians nervous and insurance companies update actuarial tables. This represents gold standard for community-based emergency preparedness, she announced during press conference held in my Siren's shadow. Mr. Whitfield's system exceeded federal response capabilities and saved lives that official warnings alone couldn't protect. Legal resolution was swift and targeted. Harassment charges against Bethany and Preston moved through courts faster than floodwater through subdivisions. Preston's company faced federal environmental fraud charges, bank fraud for misrepresenting loan collateral, and conspiracy charges focused on their systematic suppression of safety data. Miguel Santos received federal whistleblower protection and a commendation for his courage in exposing the fraud. Bethany filed bankruptcy after insurance denied flood claims. Living in documented flood zones while fighting flood warnings doesn't qualify for coverage. She moved back to Dallas, presumably to terrorize other neighborhoods with her suburban tyranny. Preston's criminal trial was scheduled for 2026, but company stock had crashed harder than meteorites hitting concrete. 3 other Texas developments came under federal investigation for similar environmental fraud schemes. Community healing happened organically and beautifully. Comfort Community Emergency Preparedness Day became annual celebration featuring disaster response demonstrations, equipment exhibits, and barbecue that actually united neighbors instead of dividing them. Mrs. Henderson became one of my strongest supporters. Marcus, I owe you an apology and my family's lives. I let social pressure override common sense. The bridge club that shunned me? Half of them thanked you personally after the flood. Tommy reopened business relationships with visible emotion. Marcus, I should have stood up to Bethany's pressure campaign from day one. Good neighbors support each other, especially when they're trying to help. Your business is always welcome here. But the healing wasn't universal, and that was realistic. Johnson from Creekview Manor, whose house was damaged in the flood, still harbored resentment. Your siren saved lives, but it didn't save my property values. We could have found a quieter solution. His perspective reminded me that community acceptance isn't always complete, even when you're proven right. But not everyone embraced the changes immediately. At the first town planning meeting after the flood, several residents raised concerns about the siren's noise levels during monthly tests. We're grateful it saved lives, said Mrs. Williams. But surely we can find ways to reduce the noise for routine maintenance while keeping emergency functions intact. Frank Morrison organized community discussions about balancing safety with quality of life, leading to modifications that reduced test volume while maintaining emergency capabilities. Frank Morrison organized veteran-led preparedness workshops that spread across Central Texas like common sense finally getting recognition. Personal redemption exceeded expectations. I established the Sarah Whitfield Emergency Preparedness Foundation, using settlement money and donations from grateful flood survivors. The foundation provides grants for civilian warning systems in rural communities where government resources can't reach quickly enough. But there was one conversation I needed to have. 3 months after the flood, I found Bethany at the grocery store, looking tired and defeated. She'd been staying with friends since losing her house. Bethany, I said quietly, I don't hold any resentment. I just wanted to make sure no one else would have to lose someone they love like I lost Sarah. She looked at me for a long moment, tears in her eyes. I was so scared of losing everything that I couldn't see I was risking everyone's lives. I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm truly sorry. It wasn't absolution, but it was understanding. Sometimes that's enough. Knowledge nugget finale. Properly designed civilian emergency systems supplement official warning networks when integrated with federal monitoring and staffed by qualified emergency management professionals. NOAA actively encourages private early warning systems following established protocols. Key takeaway: individual preparedness becomes community protection when properly planned, legally implemented, and operated by people who understand survival science. My Siren system became the model for rural emergency preparedness, featured in FEMA training materials and university research studying civilian disaster response. The bigger picture revealed systematic change. Preston's environmental fraud trial sparked new Texas legislation requiring public disclosure of all flood risk studies before development approval. The Whitfield Amendment mandated communities in flood zones install adequate warning systems before approving new construction. Miguel Santos now works for our foundation, helping identify other developers who suppress environmental data. Personal happiness arrived in unexpected packages. I remarried 2 years later. Elena Rodriguez, elementary school teacher who'd evacuated her students using my siren warnings. She understood that preparedness isn't paranoia when backed by expertise and genuine community concern. I knew you were special when your siren gave my class time to reach safety, she told me during our wedding reception in Frank Morrison's backyard, held under protective shadow of the siren that started everything. Our first dance was interrupted by monthly siren test, and instead of covering ears, the whole crowd applauded. Today, our foundation has installed early warning systems in 47 Texas communities. Each includes community preparedness training, emergency response coordination, and long-term maintenance support. Mrs. Patterson, now 91, serves on our foundation board. Marcus proved that one person's courage can save thousands of lives. That's a lesson worth sharing with every community. Being prepared isn't paranoid, it's responsible citizenship. Standing up for safety sometimes means standing alone, but courage is contagious when lives are at stake. What HOA nightmare are you dealing with? Share your story in the comments. I read every one, and the best solutions come from people who fought similar battles. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when institutions fail and communities need heroes.